They called her Nothing, a ragged girl at the gate of the Frostborn Keep, crouching in the year's worst frost with 7 other beggars, her cracked hands wrapped around a blue stone she had no right to carry. The guard captain laughed when he saw her. The crowd parted when they dragged her forward. Not because she was dangerous, because she was beneath notice, and the court had learned to look away from what it did not value. What no one in that courtyard understood was that the stone in her fist had belonged to a murdered girl. And the man whose grief had turned him to iron for 3 long years was about to smell the only thing in the world that could crack him open. By winter's end, every lord and elder in that hall would kneel where they had laughed. This is the account of how it happened. The winter that settled over Ardenmere in the year 1184 was the kind that killed without apology. It came early, grinding the mud of the outer roads to iron, driving frost into the mortar of low walls, sealing the river at the gorge in 3 successive nights so that the ice groaned underfoot like a living complaint. By the solstice eve, the wolves of the outer villages had drawn their shutters and stopped their roads with straw bales, and only those with nowhere else to go remained in the open air. Maren was one of those. She had been traveling the north road for 11 days since leaving the lowland village of Seth, where the harvest tithe had consumed the last of what Dama Oren's small practice could afford. Dama Oren was an elderly healer woman, with bark-rough hands and a habit of saying the plainest version of any difficult thing, and she had looked at their empty stores in late autumn and told Maren flatly that the only physic supply worth having now lay in Ardenmere's winter market, and that one of them had better go fetch it before the snow settled for good. Maren had gone, because Dama Oren's knees had begun to swell in the cold, and because no one in Seth would have helped the old woman if Maren had fallen ill on the road instead. She had found the dying noblewoman 3 days out, lying in the ditch beside an overturned cart with no attendants and no horse in sight, her breathing shallow and her fingers already pale. Maren had done what Dama Oren had taught her, cleared the airway, packed the wound in the woman's side with clean cloth soaked in the tincture she carried, and sat with her through the afternoon until the woman's eyes found focus. The noblewoman had not given her name. She had only pressed the blue stone into Maren's hand with a grip that was stronger than it had any right to be, and said, in a voice already far off, that it needed to go home. That the king needed to know where it had traveled. That someone had to tell him, because no one else would. She had died before Maren could ask what she meant. Maren had wrapped her in the cart's cloth and marked the roadside with a split stone and continued north, because there was nothing else to do. The sapphire sat in her coat pocket, pressed against her ribs. It was deep blue, the color of ice over still water, set in a small mount of darkened silver with a pattern of frost fern etched into the rim. She did not know its worth in coin. She knew it was not hers. She knew she would deliver it, because she had said she would, even to a woman who could no longer hear promises kept. By the time she reached the gates of Ardenmere, night was 2 hours away, and her provisions were gone. The other 6 who crouched along the gate's outer wall were known to that spot. Maren could tell by the way they shifted for her without being asked, a practiced courtesy among the overlooked. A girl named Petra, perhaps 16 and wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too large, pressed close to Maren's shoulder for warmth without speaking. Maren offered her the last wedge of dried cheese she had been saving, and Petra took it, and said nothing, and ate it in small, careful bites, which was as much thanks as the situation permitted. The gate guard Voss came at the last of the light. He was a broad man with a wide, satisfied face, and he walked the outer wall with the ease of someone who had done a cruelty so many times it had become a form of housekeeping. He had 3 soldiers with him, and they spread along the line of beggars with an efficiency that told Maren this happened regularly. She had heard of the gate tithe in the lowland villages, where it was described as a winter culling, a clearing of the outer road. She had not understood until now that it meant being seized. Voss stopped in front of her last. He looked at the coat, the road dirt, the unraveling hem of her sleeve, and his expression arranged itself into the specific kind of contempt that does not require effort. "Empty your pockets, road girl," he said. "Gate tithe collects what the cold would have taken anyway." Marin kept her hands where they were. "I have a message for the king, a stone that belongs to his house. I have been carrying it from the north road at his gatewoman's instruction." There was a moment of pure silence from Petra and the other five, the kind of silence that forms when someone does something that all the gathered wisdom of the poor says not to do. Voss's expression did not change so much as settle deeper into itself. "The king," he repeated with a particular flatness, "a gatewoman's road beggar, bringing the king a stone." He let the pause run for exactly long enough to invite the three soldiers into the performance of his contempt. One of them obliged with a short sound. "In you go then. All 7 of you. Lord Chancellor's new tithe measure requires processing before we let anyone loose in the king's market." His hand closed on Marin's arm above the elbow, and she was pulled forward before she could decide whether resistance would cost more than compliance. The inner courtyard of the Frostborn Keep was built from dark stone quarried out of the gorge, and it held the cold the way a cistern holds water, still and deep. Torches ran along the lower wall, and their light did not reach the upper windows. Marin stood with the other 6 in a loose grouping near the center while Voss delivered his formal report to the steward in that caring voice of his, the one designed to be heard by anyone present, and she kept her hand inside her coat pocket with her fingers around the sapphire and studied the courtyard. The steward looked unhappy. He kept glancing at the inner door. The inner door opened before the steward could speak. What came through it first was not a sound or emotion, but a shift in the air, a heaviness that reorganized the room's gravity before Marin had identified its source. Then she saw him, a man who stood a full head above the tallest soldier present, wearing no cloak despite the cold, his dark hair loose to the collar, his expression the undisguised face of a man who has stopped performing patience. He was perhaps 30, broad through the shoulder, with the particular stillness of something that has learned not to move unless the movement means something. His eyes went over the line of beggars with the flat efficiency of someone who had been interrupted at something that mattered. They stopped on Marin, not on the group, on her. She felt it the way you feel a flame brought very close to the back of your hand, not burning yet, but the heat distinct and sudden and undeniable. Her own pulse did something irregular she could not name. She told herself it was fear, because fear was the sensible response to a king's attention in a courtyard at night, and she kept her chin level and her hand around the sapphire. Caspian Frostborn, Alpha King of Ardenmere, stood very still for 3 full seconds. Something in him had gone rigid in a way that was not anger, though from the outside it would have read as anger. He knew the scent the way he knew the name of his own wolf, a knowledge that lived below language, below thought, below the 3 years of ice he had packed around everything that had once been warm in him. His wolf clawed a single word upward. He refused to let it reach his face. "What is this?" he said, and the quiet in the courtyard pressed down hard. Voss straightened. "Gate tithe, my Lord King, 7 off the North Road, held for winter processing per the Lord Chancellor's new measure." The Lord Chancellor's measure applies to unattended goods, not to people. Voss's confidence did not abandon him entirely because it had never really been tested before. "Beggars are hardly—" "Release them." Caspian's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "All 7. Now." His gaze had not left Marin's face. "Except her. She stays." If you have ever watched a room decide all at once not to ask questions, you understand what happened in that courtyard. The 6 others were released and moved toward the gate with the focused speed of people who know when luck has arrived without a reason. Petra looked back once at Maren, her young face white and uncertain under the torchlight, and Maren held her chin level and gave the smallest motion of her head that meant go, and Petra went. Maren stood alone in the courtyard with the king and his guards, and the feeling of her own heartbeat very loud in her ears. If you are finding this story worth your time, do leave a like before you keep listening. It helps more than you might think. Caspian crossed the courtyard in 7 measured steps and stopped close enough that she could see the frost on his collar where his breath had settled. He was looking at the shape her closed fist made inside her coat. "What are you carrying?" he said. Maren drew the sapphire out and held it flat on her palm between them. The change in him was not dramatic. It was the opposite. A sudden, terrible stillness, the kind that belongs to a man who has trained himself for years not to show what costs him most. His jaw tightened. The frost fern silver on the sapphire's mount caught the torchlight and threw a small cold spark across her palm. "Where did you get this?" His voice had gone very low. "From a dying woman on the North Road," Maren said. "She pressed it into my hand and told me it needed to go home, that the king needed to know where it had traveled. She did not give me her name. She died before I could ask for it. I have carried it 11 days." He looked at her for a long moment without speaking, and she could not read what lived in that look except that it was not contempt. "You will be held in the keep tonight," he said. "Not in the cells. The East Ward. You will be treated well. Tomorrow I will need to know everything she said, and everything she looked like, and every place on that road where you sheltered." He closed her fingers over the sapphire with one brief touch of his hand. "Keep it until then." She was taken to a room in the East Ward with a fire and a small window and a locked door. It was warmer than anywhere she had slept in 11 days, and she sat on the edge of the narrow bed and turned the sapphire in her fingers and tried to understand what she had walked into. Dama Oren reached her before morning. Maren could not have explained how. The old woman appeared at the East Ward's outer passage with a basket, a bribed kitchen boy, and the expression of someone who had never once in her life let a locked door represent a final answer. She pressed 2 parcels of food through the grill, a piece of sealed cloth that turned out to contain dried woundwort, and 3 other herbs from the supply she kept in her traveling pack, and a clipped summary of what the lower city gossip had been saying about the keep for the past fortnight. What the gossip said was this: that the Lord Chancellor Sarek had been expanding the gate tithe measures without the king's formal review. That 2 servants who had reportedly witnessed something in the upper corridor the previous autumn had left the city without giving notice. That the king's grief over his sister, dead these 3 years, had calcified into the kind of silence that powerful men sometimes exploit. Maren ate the food and folded the herbs carefully into her coat lining and lay down on the bed with the sapphire on her chest and did not sleep for some time. Caspian came to the East Ward himself the next morning. The interrogation, if it could be called that, lasted 2 hours. He sat across a narrow table from her, and she told him everything she could remember. The cart's position, the woman's coloring, the specific quality of her breathing, the words she had used about the stone needing to go home. She described the wound in the woman's side, the cloth she had used, the location on the road. He listened without interrupting, which she had not expected from a king, and he asked his questions in the careful sequence of someone who was building a picture from recovered pieces and needed each piece placed precisely. When she finished, he looked at the sapphire on the table between them for a long time. "Her name was Nyla," he said. "My sister. She was traveling under a sealed identity because I had asked her to investigate something quietly. She left Ardenmere in late autumn, and I received no word after the first 10 days. I was told she had been found by bandits on the South Road." The word South carried a weight that told Maren everything about what that telling had covered. "She was found on the North Road." Maren kept her voice even. "I marked where I left her. A split stone, placed upright, on the west verge at the 3rd milestone past the Galt crossing. Something shifted in his face. Not softness, exactly. Something older and more careful than softness, the quality of a man who has not been given a reason to believe an account from someone with nothing to gain by it, and has just been given one. The near touch came when she reached across the table to trace the route on the rough map he unrolled. Her fingers crossed close to his without landing, and the heat she had felt in the courtyard returned, specific and bewildering. She pulled her hand back quickly and focused on the map. He said nothing. The line of his shoulders had changed in a way she did not examine. That evening, Dama Oren came again with fresh bread wrapped in linen and a troubling piece of information. One of the keep's kitchen women, who owed Dama Oren a favor from a difficult birth the previous spring, had seen a man leave the East Ward passage near midday. She did not recognize him from the household staff. He had been carrying a water jug. The kitchen woman had thought nothing of it until she noticed, later, that the jug left outside Marin's door was not from the East Ward service set. Marin looked at the water jug. It sat on the floor beside the door where someone had placed it for morning use. She did not touch it. She told Dama Oren, and Dama Oren's face went still in the particular way it went still when she was deciding something. "Wolfsbane concentrate," the old woman said quietly. "That is the preparation Sarek's people use. I have heard of 2 deaths in the past year that fit the profile. Both individuals who had been asking uncomfortable questions about the Lord Chancellor's household accounts. The concentration would fell a king within a day if he drank from a tainted cup. For you, perhaps faster." She paused. "You have the woundwort. You have the clear water moss I packed. If you had rock bitter root and silver mint, the 3 together would counter the poison before it settled in the blood. I can bring the other 2. "Bring them," Marin said. "And tell the king's steward about the jug. Not through the kitchen woman, through the front passage. Loudly." Dama Oren looked at her with the measuring expression she used when a student had answered correctly, but she wanted to make sure they understood why it was correct. Then she nodded and went. The steward had the jug tested before dawn. The contents were confirmed contaminated, wolfsbane at a concentration strong enough to fell a full-grown alpha in a day's time. Caspian was informed before the morning bell. What the steward could not tell him was how close the poison had already come to its intended target, because by the time the jug was identified, a cup from the king's own evening tray had already been interfered with by the same agent working under Sarek's instruction. Marin learned this when Caspian's personal guard came to the East Wardroom in the gray hour before light, moving fast and without ceremony, and told her that the king was ill. She was taken to the upper ward before she had fully assembled her thoughts. The room she entered was large and cold despite the banked fire, and Caspian sat on the edge of his bed in the specific posture of a man whose body is fighting something it cannot name. His face was gray-sheened, his hands open on his knees, his breathing too measured, the careful breath of someone managing pain by not letting it have room. He looked at her when she came in, and whatever he expected, it was not what he saw, because he said nothing, which from him she was beginning to understand was a form of yielding. Marin set her coat on the chair, spread the 4 herbs on the table beside the bed, and went to work. Dama Oren had taught her the preparation over 2 winters of long evenings, first by name and then by hand, returning to it until the sequence was a thing her fingers knew without the mind's intervention. She crushed the rock-bitter root against the table's edge, stripped the silver mint to its tender inner leaves, worked the woundwort and the clear water moss into the base tincture with water from the uncontaminated pitcher she had carried from the East Ward herself. The room smelled sharp and cold and green. Caspian watched her work without speaking. After a long time he said, low and careful, "You know what this is." "I know what was in your cup," she said, not stopping. "I know what counters it at this stage. I know you need to drink this within the hour. After that, it is in your blood's hands, not mine." "Why?" he said, and the word was not what it seemed. It was not asking why she knew the remedy. It was asking why she was applying it. She looked up at him then, briefly, over the preparation. "Because someone killed your sister," she said. "And someone is trying to kill you. And you are the only one in this keep who knows all of what I know. And if you die before the Solstice Council, none of it surfaces." She might have said other things. She did not examine whether there were other things. She focused on the preparation and finished it and handed him the cup. He drank it without hesitation, which she thought said something about his read of her that she was not prepared to receive yet. By midday he was through the worst of it. The gray sheening had left his face. He was sitting in the chair by the window with his hands loose on the arms and looking at her, in a way that he had stopped trying to obscure. "The sapphire was a naming gift," he said, eventually. "I gave it to Nyla on her first year of bearing the pack title, Frost Fern for her choosing mark. I had it made because she asked for something that would last." He stopped. "I was told it was lost in the bandit attack, that everything she carried was gone." Marin said nothing and let him finish. "Sarek reported the bandit attack," he said. "He was the only source. I had no body, no witnesses, no recovered possessions. I had only his account." His voice had gone to a register below anger, the register that lives at the bottom of 3 years of grief grinding down on a truth that has been kept from you. She was carrying documents. That was why she traveled. She had found something in the household accounts that she could not reconcile, and she was bringing me the evidence. "She may have hidden the letters," Marin said quietly, "before whatever happened to her on that road. She was composed enough to give me the stone with instructions. She was composed enough to mean for it to reach you." She watched him understand what that meant, that his sister had been alive and thinking clearly and trying to reach him until very near the end, and she watched him hold it. She did not look away. When Dama Oren came that evening, she brought more than supplies. She brought a name, passed through the kitchen woman to the guard who had been quietly asked to look, and the name was a man in Sarek's outer household who had been on the North Road in late autumn, who had returned without any explanation of his travel, and who had subsequently received a payment of 40 silver marks from the Lord Chancellor's private account. The man had also carried 2 letters north when he departed, and had returned without them. Nyla had intercepted those letters. Nyla had hidden them before she was attacked. The location she had hidden them in was the thing she had been trying to communicate with the stone. The Frost Fern Mount was not merely her choosing mark, but the symbol of the location name, the Frost Fern Chapel, a sealed outbuilding on the North Road's third estate, abandoned since a flood the decade before. Caspian sent 4 riders that night. By the morning of the winter solstice, they had returned with a sealed oilcloth packet taken from beneath the chapel's floor stones. Inside were 2 letters in Sarek's own hand. The first confirmed the arrangement to intercept Nyla and recover the household documents she carried. The second confirmed payment made and directed the hired man to ensure no witnesses remained who could speak to where the incident had occurred. No South Road, no bandits. Sarek's own letters, naming his own agents, written to protect his position because Nyla had found what lived in his accounts. The systematic redirecting of kingdom funds, tithe revenues, and supply contracts funneled to a network of foreign traders whose principal backer was a rival Pax Duke, who had been funding Sarek's rise for 8 years in exchange for a promised treaty concession Caspian would never knowingly have granted. On the morning of the winter solstice, the council assembled in the Great Hall as they did every year. Robed elders and foreign pack representatives ranged along both sides of the long table, Sarek in the Lord Chancellor's chair at the table's foot. Voss stood at the hall's inner door with his complement of gate guards, as was the custom for the solstice gathering. Caspian entered last, as was the king's custom, and did not sit. He stood at the head of the table and let the room settle into the specific quality of silence that falls when the man with the most authority in the room has not yet explained why he looks the way he looks. Then he set the 2 letters on the table, He did not summarize them. He read them aloud in full, in the carrying voice of a king addressing a council on a matter of record. Both letters, every line, including the names. The silence that followed was a different kind entirely. Sarek's face, across the length of the table, went through 3 changes in rapid sequence: disbelief, calculation, and then the smooth arrangement of a man who is prepared for this contingency. He rose with both hands open, the practiced gesture of injured honesty. My king, these are fabrications. I would ask the council to consider the source. A road girl with a stolen jewel and a grudge against the gate tithe is not a credible witness against 17 years of service. The letters are in your hand, Caspian said. There are 3 members of this council who have received correspondence from you and know your marks. The rider who carried your instructions to the North Road has been taken this morning from his room in the lower quarter. He has already provided a signed account. Sarek's hands, still open, did not close. His eyes moved once, very quickly, toward Voss. Voss, to his credit, moved toward the door with the reflexes of a man who has survived by reading rooms. He did not reach it. The guard outside it had been Caspian's own man since the previous night, briefed before the council assembled. You will not run from this hall, Caspian said, and it was not a threat because it was already settled. In the held silence, Sarek raised his voice one final time with the particular act of the cornered intelligent man, the invocation of a technicality. Old blood law names the standing of a witness, a woman with no pack, no rank, no registered name in any holding, cannot stand as material witness in a king's council. Whatever she claims, whatever she carried, it has no weight in this chamber. Several of the elders stirred. It was, technically, an old provision. Marin had been standing in the corridor outside the hall's side entrance, waiting, as Caspian had asked her to wait in case she was needed. The guard opened the door for her, and she walked into the great hall wearing her road coat with the dust of 11 days still in its seams. And she looked down the long table at the man who had ordered the death of a girl who had given her a sapphire and a dying instruction, and she said nothing, because there was nothing she needed to say. Caspian spoke instead. The blood law Sarek invokes requires a witness without standing. It does not apply here. His voice, steady through everything that morning had contained, was steady still. Because I am exercising the king's right of immediate recognition. Before this council, on this solstice morning, I am naming this woman as my bonded mate, and the Luna of Ardenmere. Her standing is not registered in any prior holding because her standing is the king's own. The room went the way rooms go when something occurs that will be in the account books for a generation. Marin stood very still and felt the mate bond confirm, felt it the way you feel a key turn in a lock that has held for years, a physical thing, light moving through her from the point where Caspian's gaze held hers, gold and deep blue, meeting at the length of a great hall with every elder and foreign representative as witness. Her wolf, which she had never in her life heard this clearly, named what it was with a single quiet certainty. She did not rationalize it away this time. There was nothing left to rationalize. Caspian walked the length of the table and came to her, and she held out the sapphire on her open palm, because she had carried it home as she had promised the woman on the road she would, and it was time to give it back. He looked at it on her palm for a moment, and she saw his throat move. Keep it, he said, low, meant for her. She would have wanted it to stay with someone who carried it this far. He took her hand, and the mate bond's light ran visible under both their skin for one bright moment that every person in the great hall saw, because the genre does not grant privacy to the things that matter most. Sarek, still standing at the far end of the table, said nothing further. There was nothing further to say. The council heard the evidence in full session through the early afternoon, the letters, the rider's signed account, the household account records Nyla had originally recovered and which her hidden cache had preserved. The judgment was unanimous. Before the solstice fire was lit that evening, Sarek was condemned by the full council's vote, and Caspian carried out the sentence himself, which was the king's right and responsibility, and which he exercised without theater and without delay. Voss was stripped of his rank before the assembled guard in the outer courtyard at the same hour. The contempt that had served him so well at the gate had no purchase on the expressions around him when they heard what he had facilitated, and the face he made in that moment, looking for the performance's audience and finding none, was its own form of consequence. The solstice fire was lit at dusk, as it always was in the year 1184 and in every year before it. What was different was who stood at the dais. The hall filled as it always filled on solstice night, the high-backed chairs of the council occupied, the foreign pack representatives in their placed positions along the wall, the household staff ranged in the upper gallery. Caspian stood at the head of the dais in the firelight, and Marin stood beside him, and every person in that room knew by then what the morning had established, and what the Matebond's visible light had confirmed before witnesses. The first elder to acknowledge it was the oldest of the council, a woman who had served 3 kings and who did not perform ceremonies she had not decided to perform. She rose from her chair and lowered her head. Not a formal bow of state. A pack bow, chin to chest, the neck bared. The second was a foreign representative from the Eastern Holding who had been calculating positions all morning and had arrived, by the cold logic of politics, at the same conclusion the old elder had reached by recognition. The third was the steward, then the guard captain who had replaced Voss at the door. Then, in the gallery, the household staff, not all at once, but in a gathering wave, the way a field tips when the wind finally settles on a direction. Petra was in the gallery's lower row, still wearing the oversized coat, her face unreadable with the effort of holding an emotion too large for her expression. She bowed when the gallery bowed, and she did not look away from Marin when she came back up, and whatever passed between them across that distance was not nothing. Caspian descended the dais and came to stand before Marin in the firelit hall, and he went to one knee on the stone floor of the great hall of Ardenmere, before his assembled council and his household and his foreign witnesses, and he named her aloud in the formal register. Maren, Luna of Ardenmere, my mate and my equal, and the one I should have found before winter was necessary. The hall held that. She put her hand on his shoulder, because it was the right answer, and she knew it was the right answer, and she asked him quietly to stand, and he did. What belonged to the night was not ceremony after that. Dama Oren was found in the lower city before the solstice fire burned down, brought in from the cold by the king's own steward on Maren's direction, and given a room in the east ward with a fire and a window and a pantry of the physic supplies she had been making do without for a season. The old woman stood in the doorway of that room and looked at the dried herbs already laid in order on the shelf, and pressed her lips together in the expression she used when something had gone correctly against high odds. "You could have been more careful on that north road," she said. "I was careful enough," Marin said. Dama Oren nodded once, which was how she agreed with things she had always known, but had wanted confirmed aloud. In the weeks that followed, the council established the formal record of Nyla's name and the circumstances of her death, because a girl who had died carrying evidence for her king deserved to have the truth stand in the accounts, where it would outlast the people who had tried to bury it. Her name was spoken at the solstice fire the following year, and the year after, and in the pack memory where it belonged. The sapphire stayed with Marin. She wore it on a cord, not on her hand, the way you carry something that belongs to a story larger than a single life, close but not claimed, held in trust. On the morning after the solstice, the frost on the courtyard had softened by a degree that meant nothing to the thermometer but something to the body. Marin stood at the east ward window and looked at the gate below, At the stone archway that had framed her arrival 11 days ago, when she had been a road girl with empty pockets and a blue stone she had no right to carry, and she was aware of the distance between that moment and this one, not as triumph, exactly, but as the specific weight of a thing completed. A promise made to a dying woman in a ditch on a cold road. A stone carried home. Behind her, Caspian's hand settled at her shoulder, warm and without ceremony, and she leaned back the small degree that means yes without requiring a word. The gate stood open below. The road ran north. She was not leaving.